Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese travelled to Australia's largest trading partner, China, over the last week. And today, Federal Parliament sits for the first time since the federal election more than 2 months ago. Looking then at the key weekly indicators shows consumer confidence virtually unchanged this week at 86.3, steadying after the previous week's drop. There was weakness this week in the two key personal finances, with fewer Australians expecting to be better off financially this time next year. However, this softness was matched by more confidence about the Australian economy over the next year and the next 5 years. Looking longer term, consumer confidence remains stuck and has been below 90 for 164 weeks, stretching back to May 2022, more than 3 years ago. That's a record long run below that level. In better news, ANZ Roy Morgan inflation expectations dropped 0.2% to 4.7%, the equal lowest for more than 2 months. This means Australians now expect inflation of 4.7% over each of the next 2 years. Inflation expectations are now just below the average of the last 15 years. That was 4.8%. Now, often we say that when Australians think about inflation, the price of petrol is like a very visible cue. And average petrol prices dropped by more than 8 cents per litre this week to $1.77 a litre. This was the biggest weekly fall in petrol prices for nearly a year since August 2024. But despite the fall, petrol prices have now spent a record 148 weeks, nearly 3 years, above $1.70 per litre, the longest stint on record at such a high price. And now to mortgage stress. The latest Roy Morgan estimates show that mortgage stress increased in June, up 1.5% to 28.4% of all Australians with a mortgage. That means 28.4% of Australians with a mortgage are at risk of mortgage stress, an estimated 1.49 million Australians. Now, this is still lower than the highest levels of 2023 and 2024. A deeper analysis by the states shows, probably to no one's surprise, that mortgage stress is highest in New South Wales at nearly a third of mortgage holders. Now, the most recent ABS average dwelling price estimates show the average cost of a dwelling now exceeds $1 million. And this is entirely due to New South Wales, where the average price in that state is around $1.25 million. The Reserve Bank's decision to leave interest rates unchanged in July disappointed many mortgage holders, but the signals are that interest rate cuts are on the way. If the Reserve Bank cuts rates in early August and again in September by 0.25% at both meetings, all other things being equal, mortgage stress will be reduced in the months ahead. These two interest rate cuts would lower mortgage stress by 2.9% to 25.5% of all mortgage holders in Australia, or 1,336,000. That's around 150,000 fewer people would be in mortgage stress than there are now. If this were to happen, it would be the lowest level of mortgage stress for well over 2 years since February 2023. However, the results for this month offer a cautionary tale. As interest rates reduce, borrowers are able to access larger loans and to pay higher prices for homes than were previously able to. So although lowering interest rates does lead to lower mortgage stress in the short term among existing mortgage holders, human behaviour being what it is and market dynamics being what they are, the follow-on impact of people taking out larger loans than before can lead to a further increase in mortgage stress soon after. These are all considerations the Reserve Bank needs to take into account when deciding on whether to cut interest rates again in the months ahead. And finally, to Indonesia. As many of you know now, Roy Morgan is the only research company that continuously surveys across the whole of Indonesia. We've done this for more than 20 years, and the insights continue to fascinate us. Today we look at early reactions by Indonesians on some key questions in the 6 months immediately following the inauguration of Indonesian President Prabowo. And the signs so far are good. Indonesians were asked whether they agree or disagree with a series of statements about the country. When comparing the first 6 months of President Prabowo's presidency, that's October 2024 to March 2025, and the previous 6 months, the movements on these statements has clearly been in a positive direction. A large majority, 79% of Indonesians, agree that the government is doing a good job running the country. That's up 7%. Now, over 3/4, 76%, agree that democracy is working in Indonesia. That's up 3%. However, there are still serious issues facing Indonesians and the new president. An increasing majority of Indonesians, 84%, up 3%, agree that corruption is one of the major problems facing the country. And that's a wrap. Thanks for your interest in Roy Morgan's latest results. For more detail on the topics covered in this video, head to the Roy Morgan website. I'll be back next week to bring you the latest data for federal voting, following the first sitting week of the new Parliament. We'll also look at consumer confidence, inflation expectations, and other key indicators. Look forward to seeing you then.